Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they absolutely got it right. And this is Tom DeHolis, your host. And today we're just going to have a bang-up time as once again we have my friend John Trudel, that techno writer of all of the great stuff that's out there, and techno-thrillers and some of the engaging things that we're going to be talking about with John in just a moment or two. But just real quick, I want to take and remind you and give you a quick introduction promo back to a conference that I'll be speaking at in July 26th and 27th. It's called the Go Therefore Conference in Lima, Ohio. It's going to be held at the University of Northwestern Ohio at the Event Center, and that'll be the 26th and 27th, and then they're going to finish up at Calvary Chapel of Lima on the 28th. So come on out, go online to gothereforeconference.com and reserve your tickets so that come and see me and Sam Adams. He's going to be there and speaking. So that'll be a lot of fun in doing that. And as we get ready to segue into talking with John, I just want to let you know that we have fully launched, in addition to what Eagle Fire Cloud is all about, there is now totally 100% free, as your liberty should be, is eaglefirenation.com. So if you're tired of Facebook, Twitter, and all of the other, as I call them, the Silicon Valley techno oligarchs, come on over to eaglefirenation.com, and you know what? We're going to see some interesting things there, and the security that's there is unlike anything else that the techno oligarchs are doing to people, which I'm going to be talking to John about, because there's an article that I have here that's posted up on Eagle Fire Nation that I don't think John's just seen yet, and I'll be surprised if he does. So with that, John's on the line with us. Hello, John, and welcome back.
Well, thank you for having me, Tom. I am honored to be here.
And it is a delight every time we have an opportunity to speak. I enjoy your newsletters as they come out, and the different things that you're talking about, and just the series of books that you're doing. For the folks that don't know you, I suggest that they go to johntrudel.com, look at your bio. I mean, you're like a whiz bang in technology. I'm just always impressed. And all you folks out there that are hot rodders, you have John to thank for inventing what's that called, John, that people have up on the...
Oh yeah, that was a long time ago. We started a little company, and it did the first radar detector that worked. There was one on the market before us, but it wasn't useful. And I started a little company, made some money down in Texas, and just by fortune, we started that up. And 3 or 4 months later, Nixon passed the 55-mile-an-hour speed limits, and the sales just went ballistic. So it was called the Snooper. That was the product we were selling, the Snooper. And if you look at old movies, there was a very old movie, it's still out on video, called Cannonball. No, not Cannonball Run. That's the big one with Burt Reynolds. This is called Gumball Rally. Gumball Rally had Michael Saracen, and it was a year or two before the other one. And it had my radar detector in it, and my radar was featured in Playboy magazine.
Well, that's fantastic. But that just continued a great career that you established then in the technology sector. And, again, people can really get into the meat of it on your bio at johntrudel.com. But what then brought you into what you're doing today in writing some of these? I mean, you are predictive as your series of books rolled along into, you have a new one that's going to be coming out. But wow, how did that come about for you, and how did you have such intuition into what's happening in that whole techno arena?
That's kind of funny because, as you said, my whole career for decades was in high tech, and I did all the edgy stuff, the research labish kind of things. I was the idiot civilian in the back of military aircraft, and we did all this cutting edge stuff. I did that for years, and I'd written hundreds of columns for magazines, and I had a couple of nonfiction books, and I was going to retire. And everybody said, you should do a novel. You should do a novel. You've had all these weird experiences, mostly that you can't ever talk about, either classified or non-disclosure. So, yeah, I'll do a novel. How hard can that be? First one took me 10 years. and what has happened since is every one of the books, I will make up these stories, set them a couple years in the future, and my tagline is thrillers are fiction until it happens. Well, every one of them has happened.
Yeah. And that's amazing. I mean, I enjoyed the series as to where they are. I really, as you know, Raven's Resurrection was, I think, it is a home run. And boy, that was one that just punched into timeliness as we went through these past few years.
Yeah, thank you. That was basically, I have 6 novels out on the market now, any kind of form, hardcover, softcover, ebooks. And johntrudel.com is my website for the books. For just information about me and a lot of the things I track that is nonfiction, it's just blog.johntrudel.com. And I have a newsletter which is in distress right now. That's another long story. So my newsletter is in op for a couple of weeks. I had a very strange meltdown, kind of a cyber sabotage, who knows. But I'm reconstructing that. The old newsletter is still there, but I just have to get some new ones out. So, yeah, I'll have a newsletter that you can get to from either my blog or my website. 6 novels out, and the current one, the current series are the Raven series. Raven's Run was the first, followed by Raven's Redemption and Raven's Resurrection, which is my most recent. They are all out in all kinds of paper and ebooks, and they're coming out in audiobooks. The first audiobook just came out a few weeks ago for Raven's Run, and all the Ravens books will be out as audiobooks by the end of the year. So things are really going pretty fast.
Oh, wow, that's great.
Yeah, and so what I did, you want to segment it out? You want me to talk about the Ravens books for a while now? Or?
Yeah, let's go ahead and talk about the Ravens books, because I think that tunes into something that you sent out and from a blog post in that, talking about the Civil War we're in. And I mean, Raven, he's been trying in that series to prevent the internal insanities, and especially in Raven's Resurrection, from a coup, perspective, if you will, and where we are in an actual civil war, whether it's a techno civil war or whatever. So I think talking about that Raven series and some of the other things, we'll get to the horizon later, but I think people need to get caught up on that.
Perfect. Okay. Well, the Ravens book started with an unusual idea, and it took me in directions. So you turn these things loose, and sometimes they go places you didn't expect. But I took a deep black paramilitary operator for the CIA who was in deep trouble. He was in the process. The book starts off with him being fired by the CIA, terminated with prejudice. Actually, they wanted to try him for treason because he damaged some Iranian facilities, and just kind of in the course of things. He wasn't approved to do that, so they fired him, and he got rescued by other people in the government. And they paired him with a very unusual woman. People were saying it's the most interesting pairing in thrillers. Raven is deep black, very violent, and very effective. He's paired with a paranormal viewer named Josie. And she is the exact opposite. She's very woo-woo, very sensitive, and she's a national resource. She can see things across time and space. And as fantastic as that sounds, we actually in the past have employed such things. I could talk about that for a while, but it's kind of real. Yeah. Anyway, so we have Raven and Josie, and of course, what they do is they rescue Raven. They got some things they want him to do. And so they sheep dip him, change his name, give him a new identity. And his job is to protect Josie, keep her alive. She can see evil, but she can't get near it. Any kind of violence freaks her out, could even kill her. Well, Raven, of course, is nothing but violence. So he's around all the time, and they have an interesting relationship, okay? And what that leads us into, and that was my first Ravens book. At the time, I thought it was a very scary but very improbable storyline. I had, what if you had terrorists with Iranian nuclear weapons? Yeah. You know, couldn't possibly happen, right?
Right. Oh, no.
Well,
yeah.
Okay. Except that by the time the book came out, it was happening. And that was, and back then, nobody, you know, they wouldn't talk about it and blah, blah, blah. Who was it? For the second time in history, a leader of a major state came over to the U.S. to speak and warn us of a danger. First time it was Churchill warning us about Hitler. This was Netanyahu. Well, Netanyahu came over and they wouldn't even listen to him. You know, he wasn't invited to the White House.
Right.
But he said, yeah, these guys are bad news. Well, anyway, so that starts off, and we have in Raven's Run, we have Raven and Josie trying to thwart terrorists with EMP weapons, which, of course, people know about now. Yeah. But for many, many, many years, our intelligence community was warning everybody, boy, this would be really terrible. You know, boom, and all the electricity goes away. All the pipelines stop running and all the hospitals stop operating. Yeah. And believe it or not, just in the last year and a half, Trump has finally started hardening our power grid. You know, we've talked about it for 20 or 30 years, but that's actually happening now. And we were very vulnerable to that. Yeah. Okay, so that's Raven's Run. As we go into Raven's Run...
about 3 minutes, John, so...
Okay, and 2 sequels to that book, but that's how it started. And you can look at summaries and interviews on my webpage. And probably the interesting thing is, as I write these books that keep turning real, I meet the most interesting people, and they tell me things, and they help me with my novels. And we'll get into that as we talk about the book to come. Yeah. But that's Raven's Run, the Raven series, Raven and Josie. Listen to the interviews, look at the reviews, and enjoy.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And some of those areas that are in the books, from my military background as well as my technology background, and that I've seen that, and the exposure of the grid, the exposure of just all of our electronic infrastructure, to initially the EMP and then so on. It just, most people have no clue. And as we get into the next segment, some of the things that people had no clue about until what's come out now is, and you're going to speak of it as well in the next segment, is the whole idea of this cyber espionage. But folks don't know that us that were in telecommunications, that there was an application that was foisted upon us called Kalia way back in the day, and I think you have some knowledge of Kalia. And that was, that was the first pseudo AI, as I call it, where they were picking out and looking for keywords where they could then start to take and pay a little bit more direct attention to people. So nothing new under the sun. It's just gotten a little bit more intense.
Yeah, a hell of a lot more intense, and absolutely.
Yeah, yep, that's it. So some of what we'll pick up on is the continuation of that, what's happening in that cyber environment, and as well as this whole thing on the Civil War, John. And more than that, Sam Adams totally understood what was going on. To the Civil War was more of the American Revolution, because Sam Adams You know what? He absolutely knew what was going on, and those anti-federalists, they got it right. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those Anti-Federalists got it right, the second segment. And this is Tom Navolis, your host, with on the line is my guest, John Trudel. And you know what, folks? This is really important, is that you take a look at what's going on with Liberty Works Radio Network. They are a listener-funded network. There's a lot of great programming that is there all during the week that I think you should participate in the various markets that you can catch it on. But you can always get it on the internet, lwn.net, libertyworksradionetwork.com. And Kathy will say that again. lwrn.net. Sorry, folks, I get tongue-tied on some of this sometimes. But anyway, that's one place. The other place that I'm now picked up on is in Lima, Ohio, and that network there, I will have that in at the end of the video, so I'm not worried about telling you what it is there. But just as a reminder, look at what's going on with the GoTherefore.conference.com, as I mentioned at the beginning. But we got so much to get into. I want to get back to John right away and follow up on the technology side of things. As we left the last segment, we're talking about a telecommunications software, Kalia, that was put in the late 90s is when the money we had to spend in our company was millions of dollars to put that in, John. And it was very, very frustrating to fight with the government on how to imposing that on the people.
Yes. Well, yeah, and in fact, I think everybody knows now. Of all the books I have done, the one that won the most awards was called Privacy Wars. It was my second book. It won a whole bunch of national awards, and that was it. It was basically Orwell in cyberspace. Very true. And in fact, today, I don't think any person who's been paying any attention at all doesn't think everything is monitored. They're not wiretapping you. They just catch everything, and then they do these perjury traps, including the President of the United States. I mean, so basically everything is being recorded, I'm sure, including this conversation. And that's scary, particularly if the people doing it are corrupted, as some of them we know are. But there's also a kinetic part to it, too. What I want to do is talk about, as I get into these novels, I'll talk for a minute about the one I've been working on for a while, and I've been stuck. And you get into these things, and you meet the most interesting people, and they kind of nudge me in one direction or another. And one of them, I'll give you a worldview that is a little different than what most people see the world as being like. And we started, what was Benghazi about? Okay, Benghazi, dead Americans, blah, blah, blah. Right. And why did people go to so much trouble, and what did they get out of that? Well, the people that I interact with, some of them now, have explained it this way. And think of Syria. Syria is the chessboard. People doing geopolitics for real say that because everybody is there. Well, what happened? Okay, Hillary and others, John Kerry was in there, Soros was in there. Failed state in Libya. Okay, so Benghazi is awash in weapons. Yes. They collapse that. They take the weapons, run them up through Turkey, down into Syria, and with a wave of a magic wand, all of a sudden ISIS is created. Mm-hmm. And that started the Arab Spring, and the idea was to create total chaos. Right. And to a large extent it did. Plus, once it got started, they already had a bunch of weapons. Well, they went up into Iraq and took the weapons we left there. Yes. And Kerry's major miscalculation, he's not the sharpest knife in the drawer. He thought, well, they'll just depose the government in Syria. Well, unfortunately, the Russians were there, and it's important to them. They've had a port there. They don't have many warm water ports, so that's a big deal to them. They weren't going to give that up. So they still haven't toppled Assad, but they pretty much messed up the region. And the payoff was the biggest forced migration in world history.
Yep.
Listen to that. In world history. I mean, the Muslims did it back 1,000 years ago. This was more people, and they were just fleeing for their lives, and in them were terrorists and everything else, and that messed up Western Europe.
Yes.
Well, what is happening now, and they called that the chessboard because everything ran through Syria, and everybody's there, all the Gulf states, there's Israel, Russia, China, on and on and on. And it's a mess, okay, and it's still sorting out. Well, the new chessboard, which is where I'm going to put Raven, where I intend to put Raven, and why my new book has been stuck for so long, the new invasion route, the new chessboard is Venezuela. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Venezuela is the new Syria. And I ask people, and so I've been well, when are you getting your book out, Joe? I have to actually see this stuff. And I have friends in the Border Patrol and everything else. And people, well, why don't we go down there and look around? Well, it's too dangerous.
Right.
Question. In 2018, what was the most dangerous place in the world, region or country? And take it simple. Could this be beheadings or general murders? What would you pick if you had to name a region or a country for the most dangerous?
I would say Venezuela because I know Venezuela. I spent time down there. So I saw personally what was happening early on, and I remember the times. So I was one of those guys that was able to get in. I never used a visa, but I got into the country, and you bribe your way out. You do all of those types of interesting, entry points and exit points and all of that. So I worked with a lot of the patriotic nationals at the time that I was in and out of Venezuela, and just to watch the transition over the course of the times I was in there in 2001-ish, 2002, to what it is today, and maintaining those contacts and relationships. It's just, you're right. I think that it is an amazing test bed, especially with its resource values, and not only where it is located in South American continent, but the resources are of greater valuation from a international basis than Syria. Syria, it has a port, but my goodness, Venezuela has millions and billions times more value than Syria does.
Absolutely, and I didn't know that part of your history. But yeah, the short answer, by the way, as far as death counts and beheadings, Mexico, okay? It all comes together at our border. That's the invasion route, and that's where the pressure point is.
Got it.
Friends in the Border Patrol say every night there's gun battles within sight of the border. Gangs, cartels shooting each other, leaving duffel bags full of severed heads and all that. So they had more beheadings in Mexico in 2018 than in the entire Middle East. Okay. Now, as far as Venezuela, 10, 12 years ago, it was one of the best places, if not the best place in this hemisphere. It had better health care than America did, very happy, prosperous people. And what happened when, we had the Cuban Missile Crisis and, Castro and yada, yada, yada. Well, the Russians got stuck supporting Cuba for decades. And finally they went broke and they said, well, we're done with that. We got problems of our own. So they stopped and it turned into Venezuela. Yeah. So they were all doing corrupt stuff. And there's so many natural resources in there that the Cubans kind of moved in and they helped them, they move oil from Venezuela into Cuba and wherever they wanted. And the thing that amazed me, so that is that's where it starts. They're the chessboard. Yeah. And it's the same strategy, forced migration, thousands of people come in, And of course, now we have one party that is determined to keep the border open because these are votes for them and they're also being paid off. But the thing that amazed me is Venezuela, one day they gave up their guns. You know, we have school shootings. Oh, we got to give up the guns. 4 years. It only took 4 years from when they turned in their guns to when this prosperous, happy populace was starving and eating garbage. 4 years. And then in 3 more years, when they protest in the streets, they get run over with, armored vehicles. And who is running Venezuela right now? Who holds the key to Venezuela? It's the Cubans. Mm-hmm. There are 100,000 collectivos, they call them, and they are paramilitary groups. The Venezuelan military and the Venezuelan police don't particularly like to shoot their own people or to torture them or anything. The Cubans have no problem with it. So the Cubans are the thugs, and the people who are trying to be the masters of the thugs are Russia and China. They're both there, and they want the natural resources. And so far, Cuba is there doing the dirty work and getting the table scraps, and it's a mess.
Yeah, I was down there when the oil companies were finally thrown out, and all of that. A lot of interesting stories we could probably talk about offline from this venue. But the first time I went down, I was sitting in a meeting with some business people, if you will, and one of the gentlemen looked, big guy, looked straight across the table at me, and he goes, Tom, when you see Jimmy Carter, you tear out his tongue, you rip off his ear, you put his eyes.
Yeah, they
why? So I'm asking him, why? And he goes, because of Jimmy Carter. The communist president we have. Whoa. So, it's been that whole strain of things, and we're getting down to that 3-minute mark. But in this, I want to throw something at you to think about. So this is a surprise for you, John. I don't know. It just came out here a few hours ago on Fox News, is that the Navy wants 350 billion social media posts for epic research project. They want to take, and the whole intent on this is that the Navy said that the project is part of an ongoing research conducted through the Department of Defense and analysis at the Naval Postgraduate School, which you know very well.
Oh, yes.
Yes. Our research aimed to provide enhanced understanding of fundamental social dynamics to model the evolution of linguistic communities and emerging modes of collective expression over time and across countries. Isn't that interesting?
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things I was going to recommend, and will recommend now, a couple of books.
Yeah, we're down to a minute and a half. So,
real quick, Jack Probasek, 4D Warfare. 4D Warfare. Jack is retired naval intelligence, and his book talks about this kind of stuff very effectively, and it's what's going on now. We are at war. As far as the Civil War, it's going. Right now, it's not a shooting war, and we'll talk about that more in the next section. But what we're having an information war, and if you want to understand how that works, Jack's book is good, simple, very direct, and it would be right in with what you're talking about because that's the background he comes out of.
Yes, excellent. So what's the name of that book one more time?
4D Warfare. 4D Warfare.
Excellent.
Yeah, 4D Warfare. It's you can get on Kindle or anything else. Yeah. And he gives examples of how we're manipulating societies.
Yes. And some of the things that were always in a communication warfare, and this is some of what Sam Adams clearly understood, especially when it came to media, because as a young man, he actually started a newspaper, and that was the primary means of always how we look at warfare and how we look at communication into the citizenry and continue to go back and forth in what people understand. And so Sam Adams, he got it. And I guarantee you, those anti-federalists, they really understood it and communicated. So we'll be back for the third segment with John Trudel. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this third segment of Samuel Adams Returns. And we are continuing with a great conversation with my friend John Trudel. And John, we were finished up the last segment talking about, I call it the Naval Postgraduate skunky basement there on campus. I've been on campus before, so there's a lot of different stuff there. And you've actually taught at Naval Postgraduate School, if I recall correctly.
Actually, I have. That's another very long story.
Yeah. So what we were mentioning in there about this Navy project, I think that's interesting. And continuing then on that discussion, you know what, I jumped so hard into Venezuela because I still live it, because I have friends there. But what you were talking about the border, and I think we know some of the same people down there from Arizona relative to the Border Patrol and all that's happening across those various sectors, and the absolute invasion that's coming through, and how this sets in motion then a lot of where you're trying to develop your next book. I'm getting excited. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm putting Raven down on the invasion route, and I'm trying to keep him alive long enough to get something done. But the whole route is very scary. Even the Secretary of State won't go into Venezuela right now. It is too freaking dangerous.
Yeah. Well, I'll go with Raven. Yeah.
Raven would be good. Yeah. So basically, there's a joke that has been going around for a long time, ever since Trump took over. It's going to be a civil war. And the joke, no, there's not going to be a civil war. Why not? Well, number one, if the liberals wanted to have a civil war, we'd already be having it. Mm-hmm. And if the people on the right wanted to have a civil war, there wouldn't be any liberals.
Right.
Okay. So that's the joke.
Right.
Well, the problem is there is one going on, mm-hmm. but it is this information war twisting reality and absolutely screwing up our rights. I mentioned the 4D warfare. That's a good book. Yeah. Another one that affects, I think, a mutual friend of ours, Dr. Jerome Corsi. He's been on your show, and I've been at events with him. Silent No More. He got caught in the Mueller investigation and was looking at prison for the rest of his life if he didn't cave in and do what they wanted, and he refused. Right. And his book, Silent No More. How could that happen in America? Mm-hmm. It's what happened to General Flynn. Yes. So I highly recommend the Corsi book. It's a little bitty book. And then the one that is just out, that is, it's only been out for a few days, number one in the world right now, number one on Amazon, number one even in the liberal press, Unfreedom in the Press, Mark Levin, and he has the whole history of public communications, a history that I did not know, the different eras that the press has been through. Mm-hmm. And what he points out, right, this basically is the primary weapon for undermining America, because almost nothing you hear or see on the news is true. I tell people there's probably more truth in novels today than there is on the news, and everybody says, yeah,
Yeah, you get all that agreement. It's always interesting because I go back and many times in one of my books as well, I go through what has been, nothing new, as I always say, under the sun. So we know back in '63, as you can well recall, is that the goals, the 45 goals of the communists, was read into the congressional record. And one of those goals was to take over the press. And so right. When we see that, and we see what's happened in now in the Silicon Valley and the Techno Oligarchs, my goodness, right. It's just an amazing thing. And if I may, I'm going to promo what we're doing with Eagle Fire Nation and with Eagle Fire Cloud. Is that we have developed a whole environment that answers that. And that's something that, I think I did a program on it, and I will, again, I'll bring you up to speed on it. But we've got military-grade security on there, and we've had already, some of our clients have had Russians, Chinese, and even Microsoft try to hack their way in, and we've been able to, abort any of that type of hack activity. But you're right. That's the war. That's the war that's going on, is for our digital rights, our digital liberty. And the Facebook, Google, swoogles, and noogles, boy, they have no mercy.
No mercy, and leave Amazon in there too with Bezos, who now owns the Washington Post.
Yeah.
And the key thing here, Civil War. What is a Civil War? Is basically the Democrats have formally rejected our system of government now. They're all for things like, open borders and no Constitution and no innocent until proven guilty and everything. And that is the main thing that marks the Civil War, is there's a fundamental difference about the outcome of an election. And that's where we are now. And what they're doing is they're fighting a very determined information war, twisting everything and creating false events. And that's why Levin's book is so good. They basically manufacture news. And the decisions are, how do you feel about things? No, what about reality and what's really happening?
Right. Well, that reminds me, and that's why I love going back. And I know Levin, as you mentioned, I haven't had the opportunity to read his book yet. But if I just from my historic studies of the foundation of the nation and go back and reading just the different press accounts of things that were going on, and the difference between what the Tories would take and write and the propaganda that we call it now, that they were promoting relative to what the truth and facts were from originally looking at the covenantal relationship that the colonies had with the king, not with Parliament, and then the press was the whole animal, especially the Tory press, in trying to subvert the liberties of the people within the colonies. And that's why they had to always try and keep a free and independent press. So,
Yeah, the pamphlets and everything else, and hiding the printing presses.
Right.
Yeah, we actually been through a couple of cycles like that. And this one is the first time since we've been a nation, with a republic and with a constitution, that the entire communications media, with a few exceptions, has been totally taken over. And people, we have 30% of our population, probably that's their reality, and it isn't what's happening. They're worried about the wrong things.
Right. Well, that's what I always tell people, having had the opportunity to, work my way up as an executive into the telecom space and work with the likes of our good friend Ben. What we saw and what you saw at the beginning of technology and the internet, because I tell people, I was a guy that wrote a business plan for a telephone company and first introduced how to do internet as a business instead of what was happening at either DOD or National Science Foundation. And we were able to make a business element, and to the extent I even put in dial-up servers. So I've been around. And what we have today, I am absolutely aghast at. It's just, beyond. When I spoke at ISPCon in 1998, I talked about the matrix, and I talked about the future of what we now call IoT. And I'm sitting here going, today, there's good sides to things, but the way that it's been weaponized against us and our liberties, my goodness, John, what are your thoughts?
Oh, absolutely. And it's all that, but we have a functional shadow government. If you go, 5-10 miles from the White House, there's Obama and, Valerie Jarrett and all those people. She's Iranian, by the way. Yes. And they're running their own shadow government with a lot of people, 30,000 organizing for action, people in America. So we have a shadow government competing with the elected government of the U.S. And right now, I think they're terrified. Their only chance to keep it's all about power.
Yes.
They'll do anything they can. And the next election, talk about cybersecurity. What about having these elections where there's no photo ID, it's all electronic, and the voting machines are made by George Soros's company? Give me a break.
Yeah. Well, look what happened, and I can't remember what Oregon, but I know in Washington State when we still lived there, I testified before the Senate and the House in Washington when they were fully eliminating the ballot box and going to mail-in ballots, because that's all they do now. They have, you don't go to, and there's other states that you don't even do electronic voting. You just mail in your ballot and you hope that it gets counted correctly. So
it's all vote by. Oregon is 100% vote by mail, and they give ID cards to illegal aliens for driver's licenses. Right. Okay, yeah. And so there you are. And we just now went through a situation. I was down in Arizona, of course. We've only been back for 2 weeks. And they were after gun rights. So you come back, and if you have a magazine that holds more than 10 rounds, you're a felon, blah, blah, blah. They almost did that. And the other thing they wanted, and the two things they did not get, they did not change the gun laws, only because half the legislature walked out and they couldn't have a quorum. But they wanted to basically have onerous gun laws and forget about the Second Amendment. But they also had people very upset, and this was kind of funny in Oregon. The idea now you have part of the invasion route here is they're very violent people and they will kill you and cut your head off and everything else. But of the people coming in, 30 to 50% of them are plague carriers. Yes. Okay. Yes. And my friends on the Border Patrol, every time, and a lot of them just walk across the border, say, we're very sick and everything, take us to the hospital. And each time they do that, it ties up 2 Border Patrol agents because they have to babysit them. Okay. So we have everything from, flesh-eating bacteria to pick any disease. It's here. And, it's pretty freaking scary. Yeah. But come back to Oregon, and so what they were going to do, they were going to do gun control, and they were going to have a law that says, we have more diseases now. These old diseases are back. So the government, without your permission, should be able to inject you with anything they feel like. Okay? Yeah. And it turns out Oregon has a very high percentage of Russians. It's 20 to 30%, maybe higher in some counties. Solzhenitsyn was here for a while. They live that. They are terrified of that. Sure. So you just had thousands of Russians calling Salem, Oregon, and calling their legislature. And all these idiots in Salem are, it's Russian bots. It's Russian. Yeah. No, these are the Russians that have lived here for 30 years. They lived under the Iron Curtain, for God's sakes, Yeah.
We're down to our last 2 minutes, John. So go ahead and give me about a minute idea of where you're going to be, what you're going to be doing, and then I'll pick it up at the last 30 seconds and do the wrap-up.
Okay, well, I do thriller novels, and it's www.johntrudel.com. Find out all about the books. The Raven series is very hot. Book number 4 will hopefully be out by the end of the year. I am moving forward on it and learning all kinds of things, some of which we've touched upon. Hope to have that out by the end of the year. And my blog is just blog.johntrudel.com. And I had kind of a breach of my mail system, and I'm switching vendors, and it'll be back up. So you can contact me through my blog, through my website, and listen to the interviews. And in fact, this interview should be up very quickly on my author site. Looking forward to that. Thank you for your interest in report and support, and please take a look at my novels.
Very good. Yes, please, folks. Check out everything that John's doing, and I'll tell you what, you will be thrilled with his books. They're excellent. I enjoy them. And as we look forward to next week, we'll have another guest on next week talking about some additional very, very interesting topics, and going from the Civil War into the culture war, and they actually do tie together. And I guarantee you that Sam Adams, being the father of the American Revolution, he understood every aspect of it. And one of the other things that we know is that the Anti-Federalists ensured that we had a Bill of Rights. And so they got it right. So come on back next week at Sam Adams Returns.